Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Good afternoon. Today we will address a very important um, area of research, and that is qualitative research. And we will focus on deliberating on the different types of qualitative research, particularly 7 types of qualitative research. And we're given the title Types of Qualitative Research, 7 C's of Methodological Traditions. And as you will see in our discussion, there'll be several parts of our discussion, that qualitative research is rooted in many methodological traditions. And you'll see there's tradition behind the tradition, there's philosophical tradition behind the tradition as well. And it can come from variety of fields as well, the variety of studies as well. And in this particular presentation, we will address 7 particular methodological tradition, 7 methodological paradigms. You can call that and call it that as well. And we will talk about it, talking about the essence of it, and perhaps relating to a couple of illustrations, so that we could better understand the 7 types, or the 7 types of qualitative research. Let's go through the first slide, right? And this is a slide that I've shown before, and it is about emphasizing the importance of qualitative research. And Einstein, probably one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known scientists, once stated that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And that is actually the spirit of qualitative research. Qualitative research attempts to look into the world, look at the reality from many different lenses, from multiple perspectives, including those that cannot be, those perspectives and those realities that cannot be measured, that cannot be quantified, and cannot be counted. Yeah. And in that sense, qualitative research can go really deep, can go really wide, can go multiple dimensions, right? And can even look at realities from different perspectives. And that is the strength, the beauty, the power of qualitative research. Let's go through. Let's go to the first type of qualitative research, and that is historical research. Historical research is probably the type of qualitative research that is the broadest of all. It is the biggest type of qualitative research, in the sense that it allows a lot of space for different kinds of data to be included, to be incorporated, to be studied and interpreted, right? So if you look at the description of historical research, it is a type of research that will produce systematic accounts of past events, past places, people, chronology, and context, and the interconnections, using data derived from folkloristics. It's an interesting word there, meaning from folklores, from stories, right? From archives, online sites, and offline documents, from artifacts, from interviews or oral histories, and possibly drawing from various academic fields such as archaeology, genealogy, historical sociology, anthropology, linguistics, manuscriptology, natural sciences, and semiotics, right? And then historical research is a type of research that allows for a high degree of flexibility, of course, depending on the different tradition or different conventions within historical research as well, right? But it allows for that space for the researchers to draw from different sets of data, different traditions, and put them together and weave them together into a systematic account, a systematic analysis of the past. And And do not confuse this with historiography, which is a study of how history is being studied using what type of historical research. So historiography is about study of history rather than historical research, right? It's more or less a critique of history. So if we conduct historical research, we are looking into the past and conveying the past, conveying events of the past through an analytical lenses, and looking at the interconnections, looking at sometimes it's about studying a particular fact, right? Not even a theory, just a fact, right? And the fact alone can be a subject, an objective of research. Right? It could be, did someone do something? And that is alone a historical research. And that is, so you can go very specific, or you can go into whole event, you know, the conquest of Vietnam by United States, or you know, the attempt of Russia to conquer Afghanistan. Yeah. And this is, you know, huge event like that. Or you can look at something really specific, right? Did somebody write this manuscript, or somebody else wrote this manuscript? So that alone can be a historical research, depending on the size, depending on the type and the research question, right? So we begin with this type of qualitative research. And again, in historical research, you are allowed, although by convention, historical research is qualitative, but a lot of it can also be quantitative, right? So historical research can use statistics, can use quantitative analysis as well. So historical research is generally qualitative in nature, but not limited to qualitative data alone, right? And that is historical research. And if you look at any works that have done that have been carried out on the past, you see that there is the challenge of digging and extracting data that is often scattered in different places, and that is actually the challenge of historical research. And to that extent, historical research allows for more flexibility to piece together different data, to piece together different evidence in a form of a systematic account of the past, right? And that is what we call historical research. Okay, that is the first type of qualitative research. Let's discuss the second type of qualitative research, and that is hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is possibly and probably the type of research that defines qualitative research. Why, when we talk about hermeneutics, we are talking about a text or something that can be represented in the form of a text, right? And the text is usually born out of a context. So understanding the text within a particular context and interpreting both the text and the context and the synthesis of the text within the context, that is the interpretation that is often qualitative in nature. So qualitative research, in essence, is actually the interpretation of reality. And if you look at hermeneutics, the whole philosophy of hermeneutics is to understand the text within the context, within particular context. The context can be small, micro, it can be macro context, right? So if you look at the description there, hermeneutics, research in hermeneutics, right, produces a holistic interpretation of text through understanding of the text within specific contexts, with the purpose of reaching to the real, to the true, to the intended meaning of the text. Because without the context, we might interpret the text out of context, right? So with the purpose of reaching to the real, true, intended meaning of the purpose, and using an iterative process of analyzing the text, the author, the audience, and the context, and then back to the text again. So we want to understand what the author is trying to say, or the author intended to say, the context of the author, the audience the author is addressing, and the context within which the author produces the text. And these are all data to be interpreted in hermeneutics. So hermeneutics is about interpretation, and the essence of qualitative research is about interpretation. And if you understand this, that hermeneutics is one of the foundational traditions of qualitative research, you'll get the essence, the spirit of qualitative research. And that interpretation cannot occur without understanding the context. The content oftentimes exists, almost always exists within the context. And without understanding the context, or the content within the context, we do not understand the content. And the process is iterative. You're looking at the text, right, the content, and then you're looking at context, right? And while the context can also be a story or description of the text, or the book within which the text exists, or the author's personality, or the author's entire works, or author's entire set of writings, right? Or the author's social, cultural, political, economic, historical context. So a person who writes about slavery during Jefferson's time, right, is quite different from the person who writes about slavery during medieval times. Quite different from a person who writes about slavery when there's human rights convention and debates occurring in modern times, right? In today's world. So the context, the historical context, the political, economic context, the social, cultural context, even the religious context, right, determine, influences the way the text can and should be interpreted, right? So going back to the description, right? So while the context can be a story or description of the text or the book within the text, right? Or the author's personality or author's work or author's social, cultural, political, economic, historical context, with roots can be found in biblical hermeneutics, and there's also Quranic hermeneutics. So hermeneutics is very much about how, if you look in the past, theologians and scholars, right, interpret scriptures, holy scriptures, and the challenge is how do you interpret holy scriptures, right? So if you look at biblical hermeneutics or Quranic hermeneutics, which is known as tafsir, the interpreter, the researcher himself or herself, oftentimes himself, right, will need to have the knowledge of the past, of the philosophy of interpretation, of interpreting, of hermeneutics, of religion, in order to interpret the Holy Scriptures. And if you go back to the birth of social sciences, right, and that is actually the contestation, the conflict, right, where we see social sciences wanting to remove or liberate themselves from the theologians, because theologians were having this monopoly, this control over knowledge. So the social scientists, just like the scientists, right, they attempt to establish a different system of knowledge that is not based on review, revolution, divine revolution, right? That is based on science, right? And that's how social science was practically born as well, right? And from this tradition of liberating from the theologians. Well, that's one particular type of philosophy and social science, of course. But you see, then I give some. We have some pictures there. On the left there, we see Li Bai, and he wrote. He's a famous poem in the Tang Dynasty. Right? Li Bai, he wrote poems that have multiple meanings, right? And it's interesting that his poems can have messages as subliminal, or in fact hidden messages of critiquing the royal palace, right? And the message can be embedded in the poems. And what happens is later scholars, right, will interpret it with the understanding of the context of this poet, of this Chinese poet, who was a royal poet, right? He was brought from this province into the palace, and he was basically a captive, right? Not a direct captive, not a prisoner, but in a way he was asked to serve the royal palace, and he misses his hometown, his village, right? And then he actually wrote pieces where he served the need of the emperor, but he was actually at the same time conveying his grievances, conveying his sadness and his desires to go back and go back to his hometown, right? And only with the knowledge of the person, of the context, of the history, of the power of the palace, of the of this province, his hometown, can one understand the sorrowness, the sadness, the beauty, and this brilliance behind the poems, right? So this is hermeneutics. This is hermeneutics. And we look at other writings, and I show you in the slide that there's another writing by a very famous poem, very famous poet, and a great Sufi, right? Ibn Arabi. He wrote a lot of books, and one of them is The Alchemy of Human Happiness. But the question is, how do you understand a spiritual book? And Ibn Arabi said, look, Quran is a spiritual book. It must be read spiritually, right? Not just literally, but spiritually. And if Ibn Arabi is a Sufi, so he interprets scriptures, events, very much from a very spiritual, Sufi-oriented kind of perspective. And that is a challenge when we researchers want to interpret Ibn Arabi's work. We got to understand him, we got to understand the text, we got to understand the context, we got to understand that his intended purpose, his intended meaning, his true meaning, his real meaning in the text, right? And that is hermeneutics. And that is actually very much what qualitative research is about. Qualitative research is about understanding what has been conveyed, that what can be in the form of words, it can be in this form of symbols, of visuals, behaviors, drawings, right? Within a particular context, right? And then we got to bring the meaning to be relevant, to be comprehensible in today's world. And that is a challenge of qualitative research. So in a way, qualitative researchers, in one way or another, to a lesser or to higher degree, is doing hermeneutics. Right? Qualitative research, in a way, is hermeneutics. Right? So we, and this is the famous quote from Ibn Arabi. He said, "Do not let the present be captured by the past. Do not let the present be captured by the past." But in order to understand that, you got to understand the past without being constrained, without being chained, without being trapped by the lenses of the past. So that is, you see, how